In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, welcome friends to the 38th episode of Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one, the official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA. A criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is Augustusinvictus.com. That is me, yours truly, the host of this program. I'm looking right now through my Instagram because two things happened that I had to bring up before we begin the program. Tiger will not be joining us today. He has real work again. Unfortunately, not that this isn't real work, but anyway, we have the newsletter. We have the viral style. I was actually trying to load that while we were going live here, but to no avail, and now I'm trying to find the link for it. Meanwhile, I'm checking here, and it looks like, all right, Dr. Fraser Crane, the doctor is in. Radical. So it looks like the stream is in fact working. So let's get this link for y'all, because I'm terrible about promoting this stuff. This is the link to Viral Style, the newsletter. If you're not signed up, come on. I don't know. Let's get you the latest issue. I'm going to try to hunt it down right now. Log in with Twitter. I really need to hire somebody to do all this stuff for me. Anyway, let's start with what I was looking into Instagram for. So Wednesday, 2 days ago Wednesday, was Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent, for those not in the know. Lent is the 40 days preceding Easter. It's a time for penance, fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. Every day of the year is Lent for me. I live a pretty severe, very martial life, as you all know, if you've ever listened to this program for any length of time. But I posted something to Instagram, and it was just a statue of the Virgin Mary saying Lent is starting tomorrow. This is back on Tuesday. And so this is the first of two things that happened that make me talk about this today. Somebody responded to the picture, commented rather, saying, "Just curious, what happened to the pagan beliefs that involved goat sacrifice and a desert pilgrimage? I'm not judging, just legitimately curious." And I responded to that by not actually answering it, but saying, I've been meaning to do a stream on that. I've been meaning to do that for like a year now, and I haven't done it. And I really should, and I will during Lent. I even contemplated doing that today in place of Crime and Punishment, but I'm not going to, because I'd just be winging it, and I feel like I need to outline it. The other thing that happened, and this was yesterday, it's been a big week. So this happened Tuesday. The Ash Wednesday was obviously Wednesday. My son's birthday was Wednesday. Then my daughter's birthday was Thursday. Tomorrow is my other daughter's birthday. So yesterday, it's a huge week. Yesterday I got the mail, and it was a letter from a young man asking for my advice because he is thinking of joining either the AA or the OTO or both, and he asked my advice. And I'm not going to say that young man's name, because if you are listening to this program, I'm going to write you back personally, and I'm not going to talk about the letter on here. I'm just going to use it as an illustration that this is why I have to do this stream coming up. My short answer is don't, right? Don't join those. The longer answer would be why, and I'm going to do the stream, I'm going to call it The Confessions, and that's, of course, tongue-in-cheek reference, not just to St. Augustine's Confessions, but Aleister Crowley's. So we're going to have to do that during Lent. I might do it next Friday, but I haven't really outlined it or thought it through yet. I just wanted to state that at the outset because it's in business we have all these weird tricks to make us do our job, right? Because if you're in your own business or in entrepreneurship, you have to be constantly self-motivated and constantly holding yourself accountable, or you're lucky enough, as I am, to have accountability partners for the things you do. One of those things is saying something out loud in public so you can't take it back. And so I'm going to do this stream during Lent, possibly next Friday. I'm not going to commit to that, but I am committing to doing it during Lent. Oh, speaking of which, Lent ends obviously before Easter. Easter is April 17th. I have a trial date, April 18th, in South Carolina, you might like to know. So that is Easter Monday, and it will be glorious, I promise you. The newsletter, for whatever reason, is not loading, which makes me concerned that this stream is not broadcasting or something. We have a big show today in terms of news, right? Yeah, sorry about the newsletter. It's just not... whatever. I'm sure you can find it elsewhere. It's on my Twitter. You go to my Twitter feed, you can find it there. I promised a big... I used a lot of language in today's post for the show. I'm going to find it rather than misquote myself. In today's episode of Crime and Punishment, we discuss the combination of state and federal charges in lawfare, the open racial vendetta component of hate crimes prosecution, and the tragic phenomenon of suicide in the face of malicious prosecution. These are pretty big stories. One of them is not big in the term of being covered by many news programs, but it's a big story in that somebody actually covered it. Even if that somebody is the Epoch Times. And that's this. Let's just start with that because it deserves the first place. It's the one that you won't hear about, but I think it's the most important one, especially in terms of what the purpose of this program is. You might recall, we've been doing this show for over a year now, but in the first episode or two, I noted that I had a friend. I still have a friend. He's still my friend. But at the time, my friend said, this podcast hopefully will teach somebody, gear it toward lawyers so that lawyers listening to this will understand what malicious prosecution means. They will understand what ethics means. They'll understand what it means to be held accountable for doing your job as a lawyer. This is that story. This is exactly what we were talking about back then. This happens far too often. Once is too often, but it happens, I won't say frequently, but frequently enough that prosecutors really should take a look in the mirror when they do things like this. The headline for this is January 6th defendant learned of harsh new sentencing recommendation shortly before taking his own life. This came out on Ash Wednesday and was updated yesterday. The U.S. Department of Justice sought 2 last-minute sentencing enhancements against defendant Matthew L. Perna that could have meant 41 to 51 months in prison for his 20 minutes inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, his attorney said. Now, obviously, this publication has a conservative slant. We at Crime and Punishment have no political views. This is just a legal program. And I'll point out for this article, just like I point out for CNN or MSNBC or anybody else, there is obviously a slant when the very first sentence of the article is saying, well, this sentence was going to mean 4 years in prison when he was only in the Capitol for 20 minutes. Like, yes, I agree. Severely disproportionate. But the fact that that's what you're leading off with, and in those terms, the way it's starkly contrasted there, clearly they have a political agenda at this quote-unquote newspaper. Doesn't mean that the article is false. I'm just pointing out conservatives do it just like leftists do. So what they're saying is he was looking at 41 to 51 months in prison for being inside the U.S. Capitol building for 20 minutes on January 6th. Attorney J. Gerald Ingram, said he was confident the judge would have ruled against the U.S. Attorney's Office on the sentencing enhancements. When Ingram shared the news about the possible added prison time, he said he told Perna, quote, "I thought I had it under control," end quote. So let's talk about sentencing enhancements, right? State sentencing and federal sentencing are two completely different animals. State sentencing, the legislatures and the state have tried to follow, I think, what the feds are doing, which is trying to standardize sentencing as though it could be standardized, right? Or should be. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066 AD and the Normans took over, right, they implemented what was called the common law. So they would legislate from the throne saying, here are your new laws, but to keep order and to prevent some sort of revolution, they would keep in place all the laws that were already there. So if in, York, a pig cost 3 shillings or whatever people use over there, well, then that's what it's going to cost now, right? If it comes down to a court case. If you stole a pig and the punishment was to pay 3 shillings plus 2 shillings for punitive damages, hypothetically, I don't know if that was ever actually a case, then now that the Normans have taken over, that is still going to be the punishment. That is case precedent. That happened in that case where Farmer X stole a pig from Farmer Y, and he was forced to pay the 3 shillings plus the 2 shillings of punitive damages. Well, now that William has taken over, now that Farmer A has taken a pig from Farmer B, Farmer A is going to pay those 3 shillings plus the 2 shillings for punitive damages, just like Farmer X paid to Farmer Y in a similar court of law 5 years ago, right? That's a very simplistic explanation, but that's basically what common law means. We are going to look at the cases that came before this, and we're going to try to replicate that in modern cases so that there's no deviation, so that things aren't just completely up in the air. We're going to take customs into account. We're going to basically try to keep some semblance of order based on what order was before we conquered the country and now it's Norman. You would think that we hold a high regard for standardizing sentencing, right? But the purpose of that was to give people some sense of predictability about the law, so that you go to trial and you can say, well, if I lose this trial, this is what is going to happen to me, because that's what happens every time somebody comes in here to trial and loses. That's not what we've been doing in modern times, however. I thought maybe it was last week or maybe the week before, I brought up mandatory minimum sentences, right? Where if you sell X number of pills, then you get Y number of years for having done that, and there's nothing the judge can do about it. It's a mandatory minimum sentence. There's no discretion from the judge. He has to send you to prison for 20 years for what you did, or what you were convicted of, or what you pled to, even if you didn't do it. He has no discretion. You can't show him mitigating factors to depart from that. In federal, and that's what I mean when I say I think the states are trying to follow the feds and what they're doing, because federal sentencing comes down to guidelines. So you have certain categories, A, B, and C. You have, have they had prior criminal convictions, or is this their first one? What is the statute? What level of felony is it? And it's basically a grid. And where you fall on that grid, you have recommended sentencing. Let's say 3 to 5 years. Let's say Mr. Perna, the subject of this article, he was looking at 2 to 3 years. This is just hypothetical. I don't know what he was actually looking at. I've not looked into his case in that much depth. But let's say hypothetically he was looking at 2 to 3 years on that grid. He's never had a conviction. Again, I don't know if he had or not. Just using this as an example. He's never had a conviction. Here's what he's charged with according to 0 convictions in the past plus this level of felony. He's looking at 2 to 3 years in prison. Now, the defense can then argue to depart from that. They can argue for a downward departure or a deviation from that based on, his community service or, maybe he abandoned the conspiracy, or maybe he was led astray by someone. I don't know, whatever it is. He's got a sick mother and he's the only person in the family who can take care of her. He had an abusive childhood, whatever it is. There are hundreds of mitigating factors you can use to depart downward from the sentencing guidelines in federal court. On the other side of the coin, the prosecutors also have aggravating factors or things that they can use to enhance the sentence. Hate crimes are the number one most obvious example, right? You have, for whatever reason, some federal battery charge, right? And they're going to say, well, this should be enhanced because he said racist things while he was doing it. Hate crimes enhancement, right? So I don't know what those enhancements were in Mr. Perna's case, but wherever he fell on the sentencing guidelines, those enhancements meant that he was looking at 41 to 51 months in prison. And it's up to his lawyer to say why those enhancements should not apply. And if they do apply, why he should be sentenced to 41 instead of 51. And then it's up to the judge to decide where he falls there, or whether to impose those enhancements at all, which is what we just read, where the defense attorney said, he's pretty confident that the judge is not going to go with that, right? Or maybe he says that later in the article. Yeah, was confident the judge would have ruled against the U.S. Attorney's Office on the sentencing enhancements. So the fact that a prosecutor is throwing sentencing enhancements at you doesn't mean that that's actually going to fly, right? That's prosecution 101. Throw everything you can on a guy to bury him. And a plea looks phenomenal. He's going to want to take a plea because you have some trumped up nonsense charges that have him looking at 30 years in prison, right? Or in the case of Mr. Perna, 4 years plus in prison for being inside the U.S. Capitol for 20 minutes. Prosecution 101. They do it every single day in every location in this country. They throw things at you they know they cannot prove, they know that are not true, just to scare you into taking the plea to something lesser, right? In this guy's case, and this happens more frequently than anyone would like to admit, his response to that was not, let's fight that. Let's go to court and you argue against those enhancements. His response to that was to take his own life. Perna, 37, worn down by more than a year of court hearings, mistreatment by the community, and fearing extended time behind bars, took his own life on February 25th at his home in Sharon, Pennsylvania. He was scheduled to meet with Ingram the next day to talk more about sentencing. Perna will be buried Wednesday in Pennsylvania. He would have turned 38 in June. I feel horrible about the entire thing, Ingram told the Epoch Times. Ingram said the U.S. Attorney's Office was not fair to his client, and the sentence enhancers went far beyond anything Perna did on January 6th. Quote, "The United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, in my estimation, has been highly inconsistent in how they treat these people," end quote, said Ingram. "This is not the way to heal America," Ingram said. "I truly believe that the people that entered the Capitol should be held responsible, but I don't believe they should be driven to suicide, nor do I believe they should serve years in jail unless there is an egregious conduct that they displayed while in the Capitol." So, this is something we've talked about off and on, something I personally have talked about, perhaps outside of this program, before I came to love Big Brother. I've talked about it for years. This phenomenon that people want just a regular Joe lawyer, right? They want a regular Joe because, you know, they know the system. They don't want anybody political. They just want a guy who's got a good reputation in town. And what it comes down to is that good reputation is based on the fact that they agree with everybody in town, right? They don't want to go stomping on people's toes in town. Certainly not for you, accused Nazi maniac who's invaded the Capitol and struck at the heart of democracy. Now, I don't know Mr. Ingram, but a statement like that, I truly believe that the people that entered the Capitol should be held responsible. I believe that is a prejudicial statement against his own client, personally. I really do. It's a blanket statement about everybody that went in there. He's including his own client in it, both implicitly and explicitly. He's saying, yeah, my client probably deserves this, but not to this extent. This is egregious. How dare they throw these enhancements? That's every white nationalism case in American history, right? The lawyer at the trial tells the jury in closing arguments, look, I know my client's a monster, but just listen, hear me out. The Constitution. This guy has constitutional rights, and you may hate him because he's evil, and I agree with you, he's evil. And he should never have thought those things, but the Constitution says he can think these things. So, please go light on him, right? And next thing you know, you've got a life sentence plus 419 years. So, this is just how the game is played, I'm sorry to say. To continue, the government planned to ask U.S. District Judge John D. Bates to apply one sentencing enhancement from federal guidelines for, quote, causing or threatening to cause physical injury to a person or property damage in order to obstruct the administration of justice, end quote. So that was the sentencing enhancement. Just throwing on just something else, right? How do you prove that? I don't know. But in a sentencing hearing, it doesn't matter. It's not like you can say, hearsay, can't put that in there. I object to that coming in. They don't have any evidence. They don't need evidence. All they need is somebody said something. A cop said it was like a medieval battle. It was like being back in Iraq. Evidence. Schmevidence. So they add this on. I don't know where he was at to begin with, but they add this sentencing enhancement. Causing or threatening to cause physical injury to a person or property damage in order to obstruct the administration of justice. And now he's looking at 41 to 51 months in prison. This was apparently based on a short video clip shot by the media outlet Town Hall that allegedly shows Perna throwing a metal pole. The clip might have been shown at Perna's sentencing. Allegedly. Shows him throwing a metal pole at the U.S. Capitol. Doesn't say he was throwing it at somebody. So, presumably, his lawyer says, look, this is the enhancement that they're throwing at you. It's going to raise your guidelines to 41 to 51 months in prison. They've got a video. They're going to show that video of you throwing a metal pole. you tell a client that, a defendant that, what's he going to think? He's going to think, oh my God, I'm screwed. I wasn't throwing that pole at anybody. I was just throwing a pole, man. Like, I just threw the pole. I was in there for 20 minutes. I got out. Nobody got hurt. I didn't hurt anybody. But then your mind does what the mind does. And you spiral out of control. And next thing you know, you've got this article about you. The 5-second video clip shows a crowd gathered outside double doors of the Capitol. Someone had just sprayed a fire extinguisher at the crowd from inside a second set of interior doors. A man who appears to be Perna took a metal pole and threw it into the foyer between the sets of double doors. Presumably, he was throwing, this is me talking, not the article, presumably the prosecution's going to argue, well, he was throwing it at whoever was, spraying with a fire extinguisher, right? What's interesting about that is, what was that guy's name? I don't even remember his name. The black cop who shot Ashley Babbitt. Just shooting indiscriminately into a crowd and saying, well, I was scared. No investigation. Not this public anyway. He's completely cleared. But a guy throws a pole toward a discharging fire extinguisher, and he's looking at 51 months in prison. Yeah, that would do something to a guy's mindset, right? No one is visible in that space when the pole clanged to the floor. Shortly after, 2 people emerged from the interior doors and 2 rioters entered the foyer and picked things off the floor. So, in that video clip, there's nobody there that it's thrown at. But still, could have meant 51 months in prison. Ingram said causing or threatening harm was never part of the charges, nor was it brought up during plea negotiations. Under sentencing guidelines, this would add 8 levels to Perna's base offense score under federal sentencing guidelines. Prosecutors also sought a sentence enhancement for, quote, substantial interference with the administration of justice, end quote. That refers to the U.S. Congress's certification of electoral college votes, which was delayed some 6 hours by rioting and unrest at the Capitol. The, quote, substantial interference enhancement would add 3 levels to Perna's sentencing score, which results in a sentencing range of 41 to 51 months in prison. Perna's potential prison time could have been as long as 71 months, but he pleaded guilty as part of an agreement with prosecutors. That reduced his potential exposure, assuming the judge accepted the government's recommendation. William Miller, public information officer for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, said, quote, no sentencing memorandum was filed in this case, and so the government had not made a recommendation, end quote. Prosecutors had until March 24th to submit recommendations to the court for Perna's April 1 sentencing hearing. Miller said U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves would have no comment about the office's discussions with Ingram and Perna. Ingram said 18 U.S. Code 1512, under which Perna was charged with a felony, is much broader than actions alleged in the enhancement recommendation. The statute is broader in scope than the guideline enhancement, Ingram said, and even if that guideline enhancement applies, in my humble estimation, a 5-hour delay is not substantial interference. And then it goes on about how they would have argued back and forth about, they wouldn't have won adding these sentencing enhancements, but does it matter? The point of this is what the very first paragraph was about, right? This guy, I won't say kid, he was 37. This guy has been called a traitor, been vilified by the media. God knows what's happening in his personal life. He's been dealing with this for well over a year now. Was hunted down like a dog by the FBI for being in there for 20 minutes. And now he's being told he's looking at over 4 years in prison for throwing a metal pole. It's insane. It's manifestly insane. This is prosecution 101, baby. This is how it's done. And I won't say it's all prosecutors, because I have known very good, very ethical prosecutors. And I've got to say, here in Orlando, The rule is we have ethical prosecutors. Unethical prosecutors here in Orlando are an exception. Thank God. That's a pretty recent phenomenon, but thank God. That's not the case everywhere. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again 100 times. At the federal level, the U.S. attorneys prosecutors are a super high caliber of attorney. They are super professional. They are the kids who got good grades in law school. Super sharp, great lawyers. But they can do the just most unbelievably unethical things. And one of those is driving defendants to suicide with insane enhancements because you have a political agenda. Happens all the time. I've mentioned before, I had a case, federal case. Prosecutor, look, my guy had defenses all day long. I won't get into details because it's a very specific case that would out the guy, but they had no case against him, and they knew it. And they were trying to get him to come in to talk with them about it. He got to me, and I put an end to that real fast, and they were out of a case. It was over. You know, that's one of the things cops and prosecutors try to do. They try to get the defendant to come in and say something, anything that they can twist into some kind of thing they can call a confession, an admission, a statement against their own interest, anything that they can hook on there and say, this guy said X, Y, and Z, jury, convict him. That doesn't happen when you have a lawyer because then they're not allowed to talk to the guy. So that happened in this case. They didn't have a case. My client had all the defenses in the world, just absolutely wasn't going to be prosecutable. And then they dropped the bomb. You know, if he doesn't take this plea, I haven't ruled out charging his wife too. Happens all the time. All the time. So, clients killing themselves, threatening to charge somebody's wife or child, using a wife or child against the person they're after. It's prosecution 101. It's as unethical as the day is long, but it happens every single day in this country. So I wanted to start with that. It turns out I just did the whole show on that. It's 15:35. Well, I guess we're just going to do a lengthy show today. Adding charges after a plea deal is torture. I agree, Utah Strong, but that's the dirty part of it. They didn't add charges, right? They added sentence enhancements. So it's not technically adding charges. I mean, it's super unethical. We're not going to add charges. You've already pled guilty. That guilty plea is entered with the court. Now we're going to add years to your prison time you're looking at because we're just going to make up all these things and call them sentencing enhancements. And you don't have the right to contest them as you would at a fair trial by a jury of your peers because those rules of evidence, they don't apply at that sentencing hearing, buddy. So good luck. Yeah, that's super unethical. Absolutely. 100% Utah Strong. Good point. He also says, please never take your own life, friends. Please reach out. Yeah, I agree. Look, man, jail sucks. And I'm telling you that from personal experience. As you know, it is horrible. It's horrible when they use your family against you. It's horrible when you're left for dead. But at some point, it ends, At some point, it's over. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, as they say. And I know it doesn't feel temporary. I've been there. But don't do it. Any plans on moving over to Odyssey? Keep up the great work, Augustus. That's from Ulfric Durensson. No, I wasn't planning to move it over to Odyssey just because I really hate social media. I hate setting up new accounts. I hate figuring out new things. It's enough. I got to figure out OBS and YouTube, and I got to post to Twitter and Instagram to advertise this program. I'll tell you, this is not why I became a lawyer, to be posting all this stuff and advertising a podcast. This is all part of legal marketing. I'll probably have to bite the bullet on Odyssey one of these days, but a couple of attorneys did that in Siva. What a filthy thing to say about someone who killed themselves. Heartless. Oh, I see. That's a comment thing. All right. I'm not going to get into that. Let's talk about the other issues here. I just wanted to start with that case, and it ended up taking the whole program. The other thing is this. The Arbery case, right? If you guys remember the Arbery case, we've talked about it on this program. The jogger who was run down and shot to death, and it was all videoed by a stranger. All white guys. Uh-oh, Roger Stone is trending? That can't be good. That's never good. Anyway, so the DOJ went after these guys, right? You saw it happen in the Chauvin case. We've been seeing it more and more lately. And this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the combination of federal and state charges and lawfare. So now, in this post-Charlottesville world, it doesn't matter what the outcome of your state trial is. It doesn't matter. If the feds want to make an example of you, they're going to. Famously, or infamously, there were feds waiting for Chauvin, thinking he was going to be acquitted. They were waiting for him outside of the courtroom to arrest him on federal charges if he was acquitted of murdering George Floyd. A deliberate publicity act to get him on federal charges if he failed to be convicted in state court. And that's not double jeopardy because it's different charges, right? You won on the state charges, but they'll get you on federal now. They're just going to wait outside the courtroom for you and arrest you on federal charges next. Or, as what happened, you get convicted of the state charges, and then they come after you for federal charges too. And they did that to James Fields, and now they did it to the, quote, Arbery killers. So this is a clip from CBS News. Arbery killers found guilty in hate crime trial. I'm going to play the statement of the mother here. It's only a couple minutes long, and then I'll talk about this case at length because there's a New York Times article on it, and I think it's super interesting. But let's hear this first.
What the DOJ did today, they was made to do today. Come on. It wasn't because what they wanted to do. Taxpayers. They were made to do their job today.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
As a mother, what role does this play today for you in any healing?
Healing?
She'll never heal.
I, as a mom, will never heal.
You gotta say it, come matter. Mother. You're a mother.
I want to go back to the DOJ. I told the DOJ that yes, they were prosecutors, but one thing they didn't have a son that was lying in a cold grave.
Come on now. All right. Come on, Ron.
And they still didn't hear my cry.
Yes.
Okay.
Come on. That's right. They coming in.
So again, we got a victory today. But it's so many families out there who don't get victories because of people that we have fighting for us.
Come on now. Teach. Right.
Okay?
There was one particular juror who became very emotional. He was wiping his eyes. Can you talk a little bit about what you would like to say to the jury in this case, please?
I'm very thankful that a good jury was selected. I wasn't worried at all that we wouldn't. I knew Ahmaud's hands was in this from the very beginning.
All right now.
The way Ahmaud left here, I knew that we would get victory on the state level and in the federal level. I knew that from day one.
Right.
I do appreciate that they took the time out of their busy schedule to come in and listen to nonsense. Because the way Ahmaud left here was pure nonsense.
That's right.
Senseless.
That's right.
But I appreciate their time.
Right.
And they gave us a sense of a small victory. But we as a family will never get victory because Ahmaud is gone forever.
Come on.
It's out.
Amen.
That's right. Yes.
Civil insurance community, the people around him that still think like the McMichaels and Brian think.
If they made the driveway decisions that the McMichaels made, they'll be going to the same place that they're going.
Come on.
All right.
So they can make the same decisions, but they'll face the same consequences.
Come on.
Come on, man. You done said enough. Come on, that's right. That's right.
Ooh, that's a hard one. But Wanda said a lot. Number one, I'm going to give all glory to God.
Amen. Yes,
Number one, I'm going to give all glory to her.
Amen.
Because without her, I wouldn't have 3 wonderful kids. I wouldn't have 3 wonderful kids. And I wouldn't have 3 wonderful grandchildren.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. That's
She is the root. So I always going to have that heart for her.
Amen.
I give all glory to Wanda. But one thing I want to say, I'm thanking everybody who that stood by us in this time, what my family going through, losing Ahmaud. Because Ahmaud was a kid you can't place. Because the heart he had, that will be missed by him. He loved his family. He called us every day. If he had but one word to tell you, guess what that was? I love you, Pop.
Yes.
I love you, Mama. He always told you that. Now these times you don't hear that, I'm struggling with that every day. It hurt me every day, so I can imagine what they're doing to his mama and his sister, his brother, his little nieces, because he was a family boy. He loved his family. That's
So, in all seriousness, that none of this is to take away from that, right? That this kid, his family misses him, right? He's been killed. He ain't coming back. The family wants vengeance. Family wants blood. The family wants something to be set right because their son was unjustly killed, at least in their eyes. I wasn't on this case. I didn't see the evidence. I can't make a decision one way or another. I don't know if they had justification to kill him. I don't know if they were actually racist and just killed him because he was black. I don't know. But I'll say in all seriousness, I understand these guys want blood. And really, whether their kid was innocent or not, it doesn't matter. If my kid is actually guilty of stealing a car, and somebody shoots him, I don't care that he was stealing a car. My son is dead, right? That's all I care about, and I want vengeance. Pure and simple. That is human nature. The point of the justice system is that cannot be the way things go. Otherwise, we have vendettas. Otherwise, we go back to the barbaric age when one family member is murdered, we take out 2 of your family members. And then they come back and try to kill our family members. And it goes on for generations. That's why we have the justice system. So things like this don't spiral out of control. So that families cannot take vengeance upon other families. So that we go to a supposedly neutral arbiter, the courts of justice, to decide this matter. That's the point, right? So I'm not taking anything away from this family in all seriousness, and that's not just not to get banned from YouTube. I really do believe that. If it were my son, I don't care if he was breaking into houses. I don't care what he was doing. Somebody kills my son, somebody has to die, right? That's human nature as a father or as a mother. Somebody's got to pay for that. That's why we have courts, presumably, right? But we see in this case how the courts are used as an instrument of vengeance. And it's not just what you heard from this press conference with the parents, but it's also in all of the news articles about it, especially in the New York Times. So the other article I wanted to read today, I had a bunch of articles, but we're only going to be able to talk about two today. The other article is the New York Times, so much hatred. Jury foreman shaken by evidence in Arbery trial. With so much evidence of racism, said Marcus Ransom, the only black man on the jury, it was not difficult to find Ahmaud Arbery's murderers guilty of hate crimes. So, as you know, these guys were convicted of murder in the state courts, and then the DOJ charges them with hate crimes. Completely separate trial. That is now concluded. Department of Justice won. I'm beginning to think that that is a real misnomer for that department. Kind of like we have the Department of Defense, right? It used to be the Department of War. Now it's the Department of Defense. I don't know what the more accurate title for Department of Justice would be. But this comes from Atlanta. And what's interesting about, well, there's a lot of interesting things, but what I find interesting about this case, or about this article rather, is that it's written by Richard Fawcett, whom you might remember as the guy who wrote this article. That's our boy, Tony Hovater. Richard Fawcett wrote that article. To his credit, he took a lot of flack for quote-unquote normalizing hate-mongering Nazis, right? Because Tony's a good guy. He's a good stand-up guy. He's funny. You write an article about him, treating him like a human being, you're going to get flack for that, right? Now he is writing an article on the jury foreman, Marcus Ransom, from Atlanta. After each day of jury service and the hate crimes trial of the men who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, Marcus Ransom went to his hotel room and prayed. Honestly, I just prayed for everyone, Mr. Ransom said, for the jury, for Ahmaud's family, even the defendants. Mr. Ransom, the foreman, was the only black man on the jury, and much like Mr. Arbery, he was raised in modest circumstances in a deep South community where he learned what it feels like to be racially profiled. He suffered through his share of specious police stops and ugly looks from restaurant servers. But Mr. Ransom's mother insisted that he never judge people by the color of their skin, and the judge in the Arbery case insisted that the jurors hear the evidence with clear heads and open minds. Mr. Ransom, 35, said he tried to hew to those principles every day he was in the jury box, even as he heard evidence that the defendants considered black people to be animals or savages, and even as he was forced to watch a video that showed Mr. Arbery bleeding on the pavement and gasping for breath as the three white defendants declined to offer him comfort or aid. I have not seen that video, but from what I understand of the video, secondhand, he is shot, he's bleeding out, and the three white guys who were on trial just wouldn't help him, wouldn't do anything. Which is hard to watch if you're a normal person, right? It was not easy. Mr. Ransom cried when the video footage was played in court. He cried when federal prosecutors showed another video one of the defendants had showed another video one of the defendants had shared with a friend that cruelly mocked a young black boy as he danced. I don't know what that's about. It sounds like some video that you find on the internet. But that's something people don't often think about, like we saw in the James Fields trial. And a lot of these things are really seminal cases, right? Like the Nuremberg trials were seminal cases for all the war crimes trials that have ever come about since 1948. They were all patterned after the Nuremberg trials. Oh, I didn't download the meme. I meant to get the meme to put it up on here so you could see it. It's who's the retarded guy? They're all goofy. I don't know their names. Friends. I never actually watched that show. The guy with the black hair, right? Not Ross, the other guy. I don't know. But he's making this like smiling, smug face when it says something about like all these Russian oligarchs are being deplatformed from Google Pay and Apple and Spotify and any financial services, and he's like got this smug smile, and then the next picture is him with these wide eyes like, oh no, when it says the realization that this could be turned around on you. That's exactly what happened to everyone who was even accused of going near Charlottesville in August 2017. That is exactly what happened to anyone even accused of being a white nationalist, a Proud Boy, an American patriot, Oath Keeper, any of these groups. You are banned from GoFundMe, banned from Stripe, banned from Chase, banned from PayPal. You are not allowed to conduct business. You are not allowed to engage in financial transactions. They did this for years. And now they're turning it on Russia to show you it's all an act of war, right? Like, think about all the people they're targeting. Like this oligarch's boat, they're going to seize his yacht. They're going to seize that guy's yacht. They're going to seize this person's assets. If America invaded Iraq and then, France and Russia and England, they all teamed up and said, all right, you know what? We're going to seize Bill Gates' yacht. We're going to seize Donald Trump's yacht. We're going to seize, who else is big here these days? I don't know, Oprah Winfrey's yacht, because these are all American oligarchs. How would that go over? Would that not be considered an act of war when you're targeting American citizens who had nothing to do with the war, presumably? Point being, all these memes, to go back to the article we're reading, all these memes are going to be used against you. These are all seminal cases, right, is the point that I'm making. So what they did to James Fields, convicting him at the state level and then convicting him also at the federal level, they're now doing to Chauvin, they're doing to these guys in the Arbery case, they're going to do it to everybody from now on that they want to make an example of. What they did in Fields' trial, where they used Hitler memes from his phone, evil, hateful memes and mean things that he saved to his phone, they're going to use that in your trial too, dear listener. Don't think that they won't. I had a case once where, thankfully, it never became a case. It was concluded at the investigatory phase. But a guy sent, I think it was Daily Stormer, a Daily Stormer article to someone with whom he had been in the military years and years and years earlier, thinking, hey, I'm going to red pill this guy. I'm going to show him, like, hey, man, read this article. Check this out and tell me what you think. He didn't think about it. He went straight to the FBI and turned in his old friend and said, this guy is probably a terrorist. You need to go after this guy. That was the response. So I guess it's been a long, long time since anyone has dared to use the phrase freedom of speech in front of me. I don't hear it anymore. I don't know if you do. Does anybody talk about my constitutional rights, Freedom of speech. Can't I say that? Everybody knows you can't say anything. Everybody knows there is no freedom of speech anymore. So why would you think that you can send, I don't know, a video that cruelly mocks a young black boy as he danced? Why would you think you can send that to somebody via text message and it's not going to be used against you in court? Why would you have Hitler memes on your phone and think, when I'm charged with protesting, or they don't call it protesting, what do they call it now? Obstruction, rioting. Of course they're going to use that in your trial, right? They're going to dump your meme files out and they're going to say, look at this. This is coming in at sentencing. We're going to show all of these things to the jury. You should just take the plea, man. When they see these memes, you're toast, buddy. You're toast. Anyway, he, that is Ransom, cried after handing over the verdict, which the clerk read aloud. Guilty on all counts. Just seeing that it was so much hatred that they had, not only for Ahmaud, but to other people of the black race, Mr. Ransom said, it was a lot to take in. On Monday evening, Mr. Ransom spoke publicly about the case for the first time in an interview with the New York Times, describing his view of the evidence and the deliberations of the jurors. Their verdict last week brought an emphatic close to a 2-year drama in which Americans were confronted with a killing of a black man that echoed a time in the South when extrajudicial terror and violence against African Americans were rampant, and when the perpetrators often eluded justice. A different fate awaits Gregory McMichael, his son Travis McMichael, and their neighbor William Bryan, the white men who chased Mr. Arbery through their neighborhood in February 2020. The men were found guilty of murder in state court in November and given life sentences. The additional guilty verdicts in federal court for hate crimes and attempted kidnapping could mean that each man receives an additional life sentence. Really? I'll admit that is news to me. An additional life sentence for hate crimes and attempted kidnapping? Wow. Well, I don't even know what to say to that. I don't doubt it. Mr. Fawcett, whatever you think about this case, Fawcett is, and whatever you think about Ransom, Marcus Ransom coming out and doing all this with the media, Fawcett is not the, the hyperbolic guy that just smears everybody and does all these crazy, outrageous things. This is actually a pretty neutral article, especially for the New York Times. So I don't doubt that that's true, but my goodness, that's a long time for attempted kidnapping and hate crimes. Anyway, shortly after the verdict, Attorney General Merrick B. Garland thanked the jury and spoke of the trial in the broader context of federal intervention in cases of violence and intimidation carried out by white supremacists who assumed they could operate outside the bounds of the law. Thank God that Biden has depoliticized the Justice Department, right? Merrick Garland is doing all he can as Attorney General to make sure that there are no politics whatsoever in the Department of Justice. And I speak for all Americans when I say thank you for that. But bringing justice to bear took its toll. Throughout the week-long trial, Mr. Arbery's father, Marcus Arbery Sr., closely watched Mr. Ransom, the man publicly known only as juror number 150, in the jury box. Mr. Arbery said he could see how the violence, the indifference, and the racism were hurting him. Ahmaud was a black man. I am a black man. That juror was a black man, Mr. Arbery said. We move through the world the same in a lot of ways. Because Ahmaud was black and he is black, he probably knows that this could have been him. He probably said to himself, this could have been me. That's one of the things I wanted to hit on. Right? Arbery's father, you heard him in that clip that we played before talking about this article. Arbery's father is saying he was watching intently Marcus Ransom, who's the subject of this article, the jury foreman, who, by the way, we're going to find out later, was selected presumably because he was the only black man in the room. He is pointing out the obvious for everyone. Mr. Arbery's father, that is. Because Ahmaud was black and Ransom is black, Ransom probably knows that this could have been him. He probably said to himself, this could have been me. You are guaranteed by the Constitution a trial by a jury of your peers. You can say that maybe we don't have that anymore, considering your political beliefs. Maybe you don't think that it's your peers in the jury box when they're Democrats, right? Maybe if you're a Democrat, I don't know why you'd be listening to this program. Not that I'm political, but I know how I'm received. If you're a Democrat listening to this program and you are put on trial for whatever, let's say theft, right? You are at the defendant's table now with defense counsel. Prosecutors coming after you. They bring in a jury pool. You have to examine them in voir dire. You find out that half of your jury is Republicans. Do you think that you are being tried by a jury of your peers? If you are black and you are at the defense table with me, and the jury pool is coming in, and 75% of this jury pool is white, and 15% of it is Hispanic, and there's maybe 5 black people in the jury pool, do you think you are being tried by a jury of your peers? I've heard a lot of white nationalists say that because it used to be historical fact, this is not political opinion, it used to be that juries were necessarily all white men. It used to be even crazier than that. They used to have jurors who were selected for multiple trials because they were known to be upstanding members of the community. And judges would call on them and ask for their experience, ask them to serve on the jury. I mean, it's insane to think about now, right? What you want now as a lawyer, prosecution or defense, you want some random group of fools who you can talk into whatever verdict you're looking for, right? You want to make sure that they are prejudiced in your favor, though wink, wink, we're only looking for neutral people, right? You want to make sure that these jurors are going to do what you want them to do. You don't want the respectable guy in town that has a great reputation, everybody knows he's fair, when you know that your client is guilty, if you're the defense lawyer, right? Or if you're the prosecution on the other side, you don't want that guy when you know that you are charging this man with false charges, right? Jury selection is half the game. You don't want that anymore. So to go back to the point, I know a lot of white nationalists who think that the demise of the original jury system in this country means that you cannot be tried by a jury of your peers, right? You could say the same for class. Not just race, but class. If a rich man is on trial and all of the jurors are lower middle class, right? They've got opinions on rich guys, you know? Conversely, you've got, as is more often the case, somebody who is socioeconomically disadvantaged, who's on trial for anything. I don't know, horse thievery, rape, whatever. He's on trial, and you've got a jury full of upper middle class folks. Doesn't matter if they're white, black, Hispanic, they're all upper middle class, and your guy, the defendant, is poor. How's that going to go? You don't think that that has any bearing on how that trial is going to turn out? Of course it does. So you would want to neutralize that as the defense counsel by asking these people, where do you work? Standard question for voir dire, by the way. What kind of work do you do? I don't know if you'd get into how much do you make, but, you know, do you own your house? Do you go vacationing in, I don't know, what's hot these days? Maui? Is that cool now? I don't know. I don't go on vacations. But you can get to the bottom of certain things, and you can think, I like these people. I like this guy that works in a factory and doesn't go on vacation, and his mom is on a respirator in the hospital. That guy is not going to be prejudiced against my client for being poor. That's kind of the thought process that goes into it, right? All of that to say, the point of our jury system is so that the defendant accused of a crime can have a jury that is constituted of people that we think are his peers, right? This case, the federal case against the killers of Ahmaud Arbery, is the complete reversal of that. Arbery's father is outright saying the jury foreman was black, Ahmaud was black, and that jury foreman is thinking, this could have been me. In other words, the jury is not constituted of peers of the defendants. The jury is constituted, at least the jury foreman, somebody who identifies with the deceased victim, who is the subject of the case. That's the complete opposite of what the jury system is supposed to be. But New York Times is just putting that right out there, bold as brass. This is everybody's thought process, not just the parents. Because again, I get where the parents are coming from. As a parent myself, 100%, I don't care about the killer's constitutional rights. I don't care what the evidence was or what they really had going on in their minds. Somebody's got to pay. Man, somebody has to pay for this. That's what parents are supposed to do, and the courts are supposed to temper that so that there is not mob justice in this country. And we are watching unravel right before our eyes the entire system we have had. So that the courts are now being used as instruments of vengeance, of mob justice. And we've seen it in the Chauvin case. We've seen it with the terrorization of these jurors, bricks through windows at the courthouse for whoever thought that was a good idea, smearing pig's blood over people's doorways, following jurors home and putting them on national television. It's insanity. Absolute insanity out there right now. And the entire court system is being turned into a weapon for the very thing it was established to prevent against. So, Mr. Ransom grew up in Columbus, Georgia, roughly 250 miles from Brunswick, Georgia, where the trial was held. Mr. Arbery was killed just outside of Brunswick in a suburb called Satilla Shores. Mr. Ransom had been a knucklehead as a young man, he said, but never a lawbreaker, and he got serious as he got older. His mother's Christian faith rubbed off on him, and she pushed him into college. After seeing many of his friends end up in trouble with the law, he became a juvenile probation officer, thinking it was the best way he could make a difference. I really learned that not everyone was treated equally, he said. Sometimes, he said, it was because of race, but sometimes it was a class issue. He received his jury summons in December, instructing him to show up in Brunswick, a 3-hour drive from his home. He arrived in federal court on February 8th, immaculately dressed in a blazer and tie, the uniform he would wear to court every day, and the sartorial armor he regularly uses to ward off the sort of racist assumptions that fueled the attack on Mr. Arbery, who was running through Satilla Shores on the day he died in a t-shirt, shorts, and a pair of sneakers. I'll testify to that all day long. That's 100% true. And as Michael Jackson said, it don't matter if you're black or white. It is night and day difference. When I show up, dressed all in black with tattoos, I'm a big guy. I'm a big, super scary guy. And I walk into a store like that, people are either following me or they are calling the cops or they are kicking me out of the store in some other way, right? And that's not an exaggeration. That happens all the time. Conversely, if I show up in a suit, I have everybody tripping all over themselves to call me sir and ask how they can help me. And I'm a white guy in both instances, right? That's something I learned very early on in life. And so it influences how I dress to certain places, we'll say. A lot of people judge you by sight before they hear the words coming out of your mouth, Mr. Ransom said. I know I'm judged first for being a black man, so let me level the playing field. All right, understandable. At jury selection, he told the court that he was a social worker and that he knew only a little about the Arbery case. In the interview, he said he had been shocked by the details of the killing and the viral video of Travis McMichael pulling the trigger of his shotgun, but he did not delve deeply into the case because he was dealing at the time with the death of his grandmother. Soon the jury was finalized and Mr. Ransom found himself listening to the open statement of Bobby Bernstein, a lawyer with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Let's back up first and talk about the fact that he had heard of the Arbery case. You'd have to be living under a rock not to have heard of the Arbery case. I was in jail when this happened, and I heard of it. Everybody knew about the Arbery case, right? But he said he didn't know much of it because he was dealing with the death of his grandmother, so on and so forth. And I don't know. Like I said, Mr. Fawcett is typically professional. He's not hyperbolic. He doesn't appear to do super outrageous things that I've seen. But at the same time, you've got to ask. You remember the juror who, after the Chauvin verdict, went all over the media bragging about how he had lied to get on the jury. He had actually been at protests for the death of George Floyd. He was obviously prejudiced against Chauvin, and he lied to get on there so that he could convict Chauvin. Obviously, he was not going to listen to any of the evidence. He had already made up his mind. That's 100% illegal. You can't do. That's the whole point of voir dire, is to make sure you can't do that. And he was rightly beat up by everybody. Well, everybody's a strong word. Obviously, the media still supported him. Let's say everybody right of Karl Marx jumped on this guy. Uh-oh, got a call. We are super over time here. Anyway, everybody right of Karl Marx jumped on this guy because that's 100% illegal. They should overturn the conviction of Chauvin and give him a new trial. We said that on this program. It has nothing to do with politics. You can't do that. That's illegal. And they let it slide anyway, the judge, right? And I think that everybody learned from that. What an idiot mistake for that guy to go all over the news bragging about how he lied to get on the jury and he was actually against Chauvin and wanted to convict him and all that. What kind of moron would do something like that? The smart thing is to lie to get on the jury, have the guy convicted, and then don't say anything. Right? Look at James Fields. I wasn't there for jury selection, but I think we can all reckon, given the population of Charlottesville, that they knew about the case and they probably had strong feelings about the case well before they got there. And that's clearly evidenced by the fact that he was given more time than the Unabomber and Charles Manson put together. Right? Clearly, somebody, if not all of them, got on Fields' jury for the specific purpose of wreaking vengeance. Now, it doesn't look like Mr. Ransom did the same thing. From what Mr. Fawcett is saying, Mr. Ransom sounds like a nice guy. He sounds like a good guy. But I'll also say that's Mr. Fawcett's job, is to make him look like a good guy because he's in the media and he's selling a story. And his story is this excellent man, this sensitive and caring Mr. Ransom. You know, he just didn't hear about the case because he was dealing with the death of his grandmother. He'd had no preconceived notions about the case. He got on there ready to judge the case according to the evidence presented. So, soon the jury was finalized and Mr. Ransom found himself listening to the opening statement of Bobby Bernstein, a lawyer with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. She said that the government would show that Travis McMichael had referred to black people as criminals and subhuman savages, that his father had disparaged a civil rights leader, and that Mr. Bryan had used racial slurs. I don't know about you, but those three things, everyone I know is guilty of all of them. Yep. That famous 12% and 50% statistic, that's all over the internet. How many of you are guilty of that? Sharing that meme? Or disparaged a civil rights leader. What does that even mean? I've disparaged lots of civil rights leaders. I mean, thousands of times. I can't even count how many civil rights leaders I've disparaged. Not politically, just legally. But are you telling me that if you point out that Martin Luther King was a communist or that he was an infamous adulterer or had a potty mouth, like, is that what they mean by disparaging a civil rights leader? Or conversely, if you're a King guy and you hate Malcolm X and you say, well, he's a violent guy and Muslims are stupid or whatever you're going to say about Malcolm X. I think he was a moral exemplar personally, but, you know, let's say you're on the other side of that fence and you think he's a horrible person and you say mean things about him. That's now evidence against you in a federal trial? That's insanity. And he had used racial slurs. Whew, you better look out, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, because I've seen those clips with you making fun of Chinese people, and they're going to use that at your federal trial. Just kidding. The Rock is obviously part of the system. I love The Rock, though, don't get me wrong. And I'm not trying to pick a fight with a guy that can bench 450. I love The Rock. But just making the point here, the illustration, that everybody has used racial slurs. Get out of town. If you have not used a racial slur in your life, I don't believe you're alive. That's just, it's impossible. It's like saying you've never been to the bathroom or that your poop smells like roses, right? It's unfathomable. So to call black people criminals, to disparage a civil rights leader, and to use racial slurs, these are what the prosecutor promised to the jury. This is what I'm going to show you during this trial. He called black people criminals. His father disparaged a civil rights leader, and this other guy used racial slurs. That's what I'm going to show you at this trial, and you will find, I'm confident, that they are guilty of hate crimes and attempted kidnapping. Does that sound insane to anybody else? It was part of a torrent of revelations that showed that the men's racism was deeply entrenched. Mr. Bryan was revolted by the fact that his daughter had fallen in love with a black man. Travis McMichael wished violence upon black people on numerous occasions. I don't know the content of that wishing violence upon black people, but so Mr. Bryan, he's revolted by the fact his daughter had fallen in love with a black man. So that means that he's guilty of trying to kidnap a black man and kill him? Or is that like the psychiatric assessment here? It's all crazy talk. Mr. Ransom said these were not the revelations that wounded him, nor did they surprise him. So then what did the case come down to? right? So we got a paragraph here on why they didn't wound him or surprise him. When he was in his 20s, a white man quarreled with him at a gas station and called him a black monkey. I've experienced racism on many levels, Mr. Ransom said. Did it upset me or get me mad? Not really, because I've experienced this pretty much throughout my life. I've become almost numb to it. Okay, so it's not about that. What was worse, he said, were the other details that emerged. The indifference the men showed to Mr. Arbery after Travis McMichael shot him and he lay dying. Mr. McMichael's unfounded assumption that Mr. Arbery had stolen a gun from his car. His father's attribution of criminal acts to Mr. Arbery that he did not commit. This is where it would be helpful to have Tiger, because I don't know the facts of the case. I don't know whether he actually had a gun on him. I don't know if that was central in the case. I don't know if there was a gun stolen from the car or why they would think that. I don't know. But let's be charitable to Mr. Ransom and the New York Times and the federal prosecutors. Let's say there was no gun stolen from any car and that Arbery did not have a gun. And this guy shot Arbery on those false assumptions. If that is the case, then I agree. Bad dudes, man. That's bad. That is bad. It is no different than what the cops do on a daily basis, right? Or prosecutors. They jump the gun, no pun intended. They jump to conclusions, let's say, and they arrest somebody and press false charges against them and ruin somebody's life on false assumptions, false allegations, on false thoughts about what this person did or didn't do. Happens every single day, and I complain about it every time I get on this program. If that's the case, that there was no gun, that no gun was stolen, and that he shot him on those false assumptions, what's the difference then between that guy and a cop who does the same thing? If all those things are true, and that guy shot that kid for absolutely no reason but a false assumption, then fine. Crucify him for all I care. But do the same thing to the cops and the prosecutors who do that every day. Every day. The only difference between this guy and a cop is that a cop has a badge and he has legal license to do it. And he gets away with it all the time, and he'll get a raise if he can. That's the difference. If that is true, what Mr. Fawcett is saying, then I have no pity for him. And the fact that they shot him and then just let him bleed out, didn't try to help him, like, that's bad too, man. Unless, of course, the guy had attacked them. I think that would be, but again, I don't know the details of the case. I'm just speaking hypothetically. If Arbery had attacked them and they shot him in self-defense, then I don't think any reasonable person would say, okay, well, you've got a duty to stitch him up and make sure he doesn't die and whatever. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, right? It doesn't sound like he was attacked. It doesn't sound like he did attack them. Otherwise, the self-defense notion would have been central to the case. And I think the self-defense thing did come up. But I think that's the question, right, of whether he had a gun or not, and why it was an incorrect assumption. Because it's not like he was shooting at them, right? If that were the case, then nobody would think, well, they have a duty to stop this guy from bleeding out. They have a duty to save him. On the other hand, if they shot him and they were not being shot at, or if they shot him and it turned out, oh my God, he doesn't have a gun after all, then you absolutely do have a duty to save that guy. You just screwed up royally. And then if I'm on the jury and I'm seeing that, you shot him for no reason, he doesn't have a gun, and you're just going to let him bleed out and die and tell him to go fly a kite, yeah, I've got no pity for you. So the way these facts are described by the New York Times I can see where they're coming from. Whether those facts are accurately stated by the New York Times, I don't know. But I also don't know Mr. Fawcett to be a liar. Mr. Ransom said he was particularly appalled by Mr. Bryan's decision to help the McMichaels chase Mr. Arbery, even though he knew nothing about what had precipitated the pursuit in the first place. This is an interesting point, actually. All that Mr. Bryan, who filmed the encounter, knew was that a black man was being chased by two white men. Why would he assume that there was a legitimate reason to chase Mr. Arbery? Why did he not conclude that Mr. Arbery needed saving, not chasing? Interesting question of human psychology. You see two men chasing after another guy, you assume that guy did something. Or you assume those guys are trying to hurt that guy, right? Implicitly, unjustly. It's very much either or you're just confused. You're like, what is going on here? That happens a lot. But I think, most of the time, people are going to come down on one side or the other. Either, hey, those guys are chasing a bad guy, or, oh my God, that guy is running away from these evil guys who are trying to hurt him. It's an either or situation most of the time, right? So Mr. Ransom's question in mind is, why did this guy, Mr. Bryan, who filmed the encounter, why did he just assume that this black guy being chased by white guys, he was the criminal? That's a racist assumption. Yeah, or maybe, I don't know, maybe Mr. Bryan, who was their neighbor, knew these guys, and he didn't know the other guy. So he assumes, hey, those are my neighbors, I know them, they're good guys, and they're chasing this guy who I don't know in my neighborhood. I don't know. If I were Mr. Bryan, I also would think something is amiss here, and it's probably not with my neighbors. It's probably with the guy I don't know running through my neighborhood. And I don't care if he's Chinese or white or black. Stranger in my neighborhood, my neighbors are chasing him down the street out of my neighborhood where I live. I'm going to assume the guy getting chased is in the wrong, right? That's a natural assumption to make. Why would he assume that there was a legitimate reason to chase Mr. Arbery? Why did he not conclude that Mr. Arbery needed saving, not chasing? Well, those are my assumptions that I would make, but again, I wasn't on the jury. Mr. Ransom also said he was struck by the impassive looks on the faces of the three men, who watched the proceedings in the company of their lawyers and did not take the stand. Mr. Ransom spent a week looking for signs of remorse on their faces. He said he never saw it. Super interesting commentary for me, a lawyer. And I hope it's interesting for you too, because we routinely tell our clients, do not have any emotional reaction, especially when the jury verdict comes back, right? Jury comes back and it says guilty, and your client starts flipping out, hollering at the jury, yelling, or breaks down crying and screaming and throwing things. They might get a new charge, depending on the prosecutor, but it also might jeopardize their appellate case. It also certainly would jeopardize getting an appellate bond. Believe it or not, that is a thing. And really it comes down to this whole mythos that we have about the jury system. The jurors are the reason everybody is there. Even the judge shines their shoes when they come into the courtroom and just talks them up, blows sunshine all over the place, saying, you are the reason this system works. We're only here because of you fulfilling your sacred duty, and we thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here, and so on and so on and so on. So if your client starts flipping out saying, this jury is insane, this jury, what are you thinking? How could you do this? It goes against the whole thing we just told the jurors about how you guys are inviolable. You can never do any wrong, and we all thank you for being here. So for Mr. Ransom to be looking at their faces, trying to see if they have remorse on their faces, That's just wrong. It's just wrong. The defendant's not supposed to sit there crying for 7 days of trial. The defendant's supposed to sit there with a blank face, reacting to nothing. And that's probably, I would bet my bottom dollar on it, that was the advice of their lawyers. Because the jurors are looking for reactions and you don't want them to get a reaction. But he took it as a sign of guilt that they didn't have a reaction, right? That's comment number one. The second thing is concomitant with that, and it's the worse thing. They did not take the stand. These three men watched the proceedings in the company of their lawyers, and they did not take the stand. You don't have to take the stand. You absolutely have a constitutional right not to take the stand, and the jury is instructed that they do not have to testify. The prosecution has to prove their case. The defense has to prove nothing. We used to have classes on this in school to teach people about their civic duties, to teach people about how the court system worked. You, dear listener, you are in the elite now because you know all of these things that we taught 8th graders back in 1960. You have the right to remain silent. We have the right to a trial by a jury of your peers. If the defendant does not testify, you, the jury, are not allowed to hold that against him. It should have no bearing on your decision. And yet the reality of it is, jurors have no idea what their civic duty really is. They have no idea what they're supposed to be doing there. They have no idea how the laws work. They have no idea how the court system was set up or how it works. They have no idea. They just go on what they're being told. They go on what their human instinct tells them to do. Well, he didn't testify on his own defense. He's got something to hide. That's human nature, man. I actually don't blame the jurors. I blame lawyers for that. I blame judges. I blame legislators. I blame politicians. I blame the media. I blame all of these people in power who think we don't really have to tell anybody what their civic duties are. We don't have to have civics in high school anymore. We don't have to hold people accountable or educate them. CNN will do that for us. We just need a pool of blank faces, a giant NPC pool that we can draw 12 jurors from and hope that we can sway them to our side. It's lawyers' fault, man. Educators, lawyers, judges, politicians, we're all to blame. Because it's our job to be educating everybody. It's our job to be telling people, you cannot hold this against the defendant if he doesn't testify. That's the whole point of our system. Over the course of the week, the jurors, 3 black, 8 white, and 1 Hispanic, ate lunch together each day. Their exchanges were cordial but superficial, as they were instructed not to discuss the case until the deliberation period. That's standard. Every jury is instructed in the same thing. After closing arguments, I wish I had gotten that picture. I wish I had gotten that picture for this victory after the verdict. After closing arguments, the jurors returned to the room where they quickly and unanimously chose Mr. Ransom as the jury foreman. Check this out. No one really voiced exactly why, he said. But he said he could feel what they were thinking. That he was the sole black man in the room, and that it made sense for him to lead them. They've completely turned this concept of the jury on its head. The jury is supposed to be there to protect. I feel, oh man, I feel like I'm in some kind of Kafkaesque nightmare at all times anymore. That I even have to say this. The point of the jury is to protect the rights of the defendant. The entire jury system is set up so that the defendant can have a fair trial. You're supposed to be tried by a jury of your peers so that your peers consider the evidence and say, yeah, this guy did it, or no, this guy did not do it. All of that is out the window when you're choosing a foreman because the deceased person was black and this guy is a black man. So naturally, he should lead the jury to make sure that the defendants are convicted. It's insane. Good luck getting that one overturned, though, because no judge on earth wants to deal with this. And I'd say no lawyer wants to be that guy that goes in and says, well, you know, Judge, this is completely illegal. This is not how the jury system was supposed to work. This is not how our Constitution was set up. This is not how the country is supposed to be run. Who wants to be that guy? Tell you what, you got $1 million, I'll be that guy. But short of that, ain't happening, dude. Too much drama, too much work, too much pig's blood being smeared over the door, too many Bics through the window, too many false charges and going to jail and being thrown in maximum security isolation. Nobody wants to be that guy. There's a lot of cost that goes with it. Jury system is just... There's only so much I can say about it, but that's where the jury system is today. The deliberations, he said, were cordial, businesslike, and devoid of drama. No one made the case that these men were innocent. That's interesting. No one made the case that these men were innocent. No one mounted a passionate challenge to the idea that, as the jury instructions put it, the men had gone after Mr. Arbery because of Mr. Arbery's race and color. And maybe that's because of the evidence, to be fair. Maybe all of those jurors saw the evidence and said, yep, they went after Arbery because he was black. That's what happened. And they get back to the jury room and they all agree on that, and so it's a quick day. That could be. Very well could be. They moved quickly through the charges, including 2 weapons charges against the McMichaels, drawing up lists of evidentiary details that supported each one. They completed the bulk of the work by the first evening of deliberations and wrapped up the next morning. After the clerk read the verdict, the judge asked the jurors if it was true and correct. Mr. Ransom felt the tears well in his eyes as he told her, yes. The killing of Mr. Arbery told one story about the country. But here, he thought, was an alternative that was also true. One that made him think that we as a nation, were moving in the right direction. We should all be asking ourselves that. Is it a move in the right direction? That the politics of the jury are now openly based on race? That the jury system has become a weapon against the defendant instead of a protection of his rights? Is that moving in the right direction? Wrong is wrong and right is right, said Ransom. No matter what it is, you've got to have consequences. No one is above laws. Except the jury, of course. Except the jury. So, I do have things to do. I do have a job here besides being on this podcast. So, we've got to go. We have gone way over time, almost a double episode today. Got a lot of comments in here. A lot of comments today. I'm glad everybody is as upset about this as I am. Not politically, but legally. This is a bad turn of events for the law in this country. Bad turn of events. And not just the Arbery case. And not just the case of Mr. Perna, who took his own life because of the sentence enhancements. That's the first case we talked about today. But I mean, every case that's going on recently. The Charlottesville case, right? In civil court. I mean, also the Fields case, which I've talked about repeatedly today as being a seminal case in what has been going on. The Chauvin case, which I'm not a supporter of Chauvin, don't get me wrong. If you've heard all the different podcasts we've done on the Chauvin case, I'm not his biggest fan. You know, I'm agnostic about the whole thing, but I mean, if it comes down to it, I gotta say, I think Chauvin was in the wrong. From what I've seen about the case, he was in the wrong. If I were pressed to answer it, he's in the wrong. But should he have been convicted in the manner that he was? Should the judge have allowed the jury to be subverted by people who lied to get on the jury in order to convict the guy? If we are going to let things like that stand, the legal system's already over. So, I don't like Chauvin. I've said it 100 times. I don't support the guy. If he were legally convicted, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But he wasn't. He was illegally convicted. That should bother everybody, whether you like cops or not. Just like it should bother everybody how James Fields' case went down. Whether you like Nazis or people accused of being Nazis or not, that should bother you. All of these things should bother pretty much every article we talk about on here should bother everybody, left or right. It's genuinely an apolitical show in that respect. So, all that being said, please subscribe to the newsletter and look to the description. Who took his own life, asks Stormhunter. Stormhunter, since you are one of our best guys around here, you're always on the program, I'm going to give you that. There you go. That's the article that we read first on today's program. Anyway, subscribe to everything you look in the description. There's all our social media stuff. Subscribe to the newsletter. What's the other thing? Viral Style. I always forget to plug that. Let me see. I've got it right here. We're going to post that right here. And again, for those who missed the beginning of the show, I am, during Lent, going to do the confessions and talk about this whole pagan Catholic phenomenon. I don't know when I'm going to do that, but we'll see. I would usually ask at this point whether Tiger's got anything to add, but Tiger is not here. So, I will just say, have a good Lent, whatever good means. And we'll check back with you all next week. Till then.